Welcome to the haunting story of Glen Rogers, the cross-country killer. It was a sweltering summer evening in July 1995 when Tina Marie Cribbs, a 34-year-old mother of three, went missing from her home in Van Nuys, California. Tina was known for her friendly and outgoing personality, and she had a close-knit group of friends and family who cared deeply for her. Glen Rogers, a charming but deeply disturbed man with a penchant for violence, had crossed paths with Tina a few weeks prior to her disappearance. Rogers was known for his ability to manipulate and deceive people, often using his good looks and charm to gain their trust. On the evening of her disappearance, Tina received a call from Rogers, who had convinced her to meet him for a night out. Little did she know that this would be her last night alive. Rogers arrived at Tina's home, and they left together in her car. Tina's friends and family grew increasingly worried when she failed to return home that night. They reported her missing to the police, who immediately launched an investigation. As the days turned into weeks, there was no sign of Tina, and the police struggled to find any leads. Meanwhile, Glen Rogers had left a trail of victims across multiple states, making it difficult for law enforcement to connect the dots. It wasn't until November 1995 that Rogers was finally apprehended in Kentucky for an unrelated offense. During his arrest, he made a shocking confession to a fellow inmate, revealing that he had murdered numerous people, including Tina Marie Cribbs. Rogers provided chilling details about Tina's murder. He claimed that after luring her into his car, he had strangled her and disposed of her body in a remote area. He also admitted to stealing her car and abandoning it in another state. Based on Rogers' confession and other evidence, the police were able to locate Tina's remains in a wooded area in Kentucky. The discovery brought closure to her grieving family, but it also shed light on the extent of Rogers' brutal crimes. Glen Edward Rogers was born on July 15, 1962, in Hamilton, Ohio. He grew up in a turbulent and dysfunctional family environment. His father, Claude Rogers, was abusive, and his mother, Edna Rogers, struggled with mental health issues. This tumultuous upbringing had a profound impact on Rogers' development. From an early age, Rogers displayed behavioral problems and was involved in petty crimes. His penchant for lying and manipulation became apparent during his formative years. He dropped out of school in the 11th grade and soon began a life of vagrancy and criminal activity. In his late teens and early 20s, Rogers started a life on the road, traveling across the United States. He worked odd jobs but also relied on theft and fraud to support himself. His criminal record began to accumulate with charges of burglary and robbery in multiple states. One of Rogers' most unsettling traits was his ability to charm and deceive people. He often used his good looks and charisma to gain the trust of his victims, making him seem like an ordinary, friendly individual. Rogers' criminal activities escalated in the early 1990s when he began a spree of violent murders across several states, earning him the nickname cross-country killer. He targeted women, often forming relationships with them before turning violent. Some of his known victims include Linda Price in California, Sandy Faison in Mississippi, and Andy Gilly Sutton in Louisiana, among others. Tina Marie Cribbs, whose murder was detailed in a previous story, was one of his victims during this deadly spree. Rogers' modus operandi typically involved strangulation, and he frequently stole his victims' belongings, including their vehicles, which he used to facilitate his escape. In 1995, Rogers was apprehended in Kentucky for an unrelated offense. While in custody, he shockingly confessed to fellow inmates that he had committed numerous murders. His detailed confessions led law enforcement to investigate his claims and eventually link him to multiple unsolved cases. Glen Rogers was convicted of several murders and was sentenced to death in California. He was also sentenced to life in prison for the murders in Mississippi. Despite his confessions and convictions, he never provided a full accounting of all his crimes, leaving unanswered questions about the extent of his murderous activities. Glen Rogers remains on death row in California, awaiting execution. His case serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers posed by individuals with a talent for manipulation and deception. Rogers' ability to gain the trust of his victims and then turn violently against them left a trail of devastation across multiple states, forever impacting the lives of those who knew his victims. Glen Rogers, the cross-country killer, had a fascinating and chilling life story that includes several intriguing and disturbing facts. Despite his troubled upbringing and criminal activities, Rogers had an above-average IQ, This intelligence likely contributed to his ability to manipulate and deceive people effectively. Rogers had a musical talent and often played guitar and sang in bars and clubs during his travels. His musical abilities were part of his charm, helping him blend into different communities. Rogers was known for his charismatic personality and good looks, traits he frequently used to gain the trust of his victims. He used this charm to establish relationships with them before turning violent. In the course of his murderous spree, Rogers had a penchant for stealing his victims' vehicles. He used these stolen cars to move from one location to another, making it more difficult for law enforcement to track him. Before his murder spree, Rogers had accumulated a lengthy criminal record. His offenses included theft, burglary, and other crimes in multiple states, making him a seasoned criminal by the time he began his killing spree. True to his moniker, Rogers was a nomadic individual who frequently traveled across the United States. His transient lifestyle and propensity for crime made it challenging for law enforcement to connect his crimes initially. Rogers's preferred method of murder was strangulation, a method that left few physical traces. This allowed him to evade capture for a significant period. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of Rogers's case was his voluntary confession to fellow inmates while in custody. This revelation led to the unraveling of his extensive criminal activities and the closure of multiple cold cases. Although Rogers confessed to multiple murders, he provided varying accounts of the number of victims and the details of each crime. This inconsistency has left some unanswered questions about the true extent of his murderous activities. Glen Rogers is currently on death row in California. He has not been executed yet, and his case continues to attract attention due to the mystery surrounding the full scope of his crimes. As we conclude our journey through the life of Glen Rogers, we are left with a chilling reminder of the capacity for deception and violence that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most charismatic individuals. As we conclude our journey through the life of Glen Rogers, we are left with a chilling reminder of the capacity for deception and violence that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most charismatic individuals.